Ladies and gentlemen, Hans Niemann has struck again. Those of you that have followed the chess world since, let's say, September 4th, 2022, are likely well aware of certain players like Hans Niemann, Magnus Carlsen. Let's add Hikaru Nakamura as well. We had a little bit of drama. It seems to have died down since then. But yesterday, January the 30th, 2024, was a big day for many reasons. First of all, it was the 30th of the month, so some people received paychecks. Second, it was Tuesday. On Tuesday, we do things like Taco Tuesday. And third of all, Tuesday is the day on chess.com where we play a chess tournament called Title Tuesday. Not Taco Tuesday, but Title Tuesday. And Hans Niemann was on a rampage. Yesterday, we saw the first game of chess between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen since the $100 million lawsuit was settled and died down. We also saw the first game of Hans versus Hikaru in several months. Hans Niemann is now up to number 3 on the entire chess.com website, and yesterday he won his first ever Title Tuesday tournament. Then after that, he trash-talked Magnus, and he also challenged Hikaru to a $10,000 blitz match. I mean, you can't... The content makes itself at this point. So in the first Title Tuesday, I'm going to show you, by the way, Hans Magnus, Hans Hikaru, and just a couple of bonus games of the Hans Niemann rampage that was detonated upon the chess world yesterday. So yesterday, Hans Niemann was undefeated in the first Title Tuesday. I think he was like 7 out of 7. He lost a game, he might have won another game, and then he got paired against Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Hans. I mean, like, this is the stuff of legends, of movies. All right, these guys had a $100 million lawsuit going on. All right, Magnus withdrew from a tournament due to the history of Hans. Now, Magnus opened with e4. Hans booted up a stream for this game. He wasn't even streaming. He live streamed the game. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6. It was a Spanish. And then Hans played knight F6. Hans played the Berlin, right? Now, you know, he didn't have to. Hans could have played the Sicilian. Would Magnus have played a sharp line? Would he have played a solid line? I don't know. But Hans plays knight F6. Knight F6 is an invitation. It's the first invitation to go for an equal game and potentially a draw. I mean, the thing is, black could play A6 and knight F6 in the main line Spanish. Hans's repertoire with the black pieces does seem to be the mighty and legendary Berlin. And now it's sort of up to Magnus. Magnus could play the anti-Berlin if he's trying to get a fight. But here, instead of going for the endgame, which is pawn to d4, a long line after that, he plays rook e1, keeps the structure symmetrical. You can't take the bishop because of discovered check. But this is a very well-known and relatively painless position. This position is completely equal. Like, white can play this for an advantage in some way. Like, there are lines instead of pawn to c3 where, you know, you can play bishop f4, knight c3, you can give away this pawn. It's like very sharp, very complicated. But unfortunately, this game is not anything special. Neither guy spends any time. They then trade literally every piece. You sack your queen, you take, and then, you know, you got to trade everything, and it's just a dead draw. And now Hans offers a draw, which Magnus doesn't see or declines to, you know, and then now these guys, instead of agreeing to a draw, shuffle their kings around for 40 moves. This is how Magnus Carlsen, Hans Niemann ended yesterday. The lawsuit got us nowhere, but this game got us nowhere either. We got absolutely no information about these two. They played 87 moves. They made basically the equivalent of a prearranged draw. They did not prearrange it, but they never got a game. Interesting. So, you know, Magnus declines us a little bit of content, but I got to tell you, Hans could have played a Sicilian. You know, he could have went for a win on move 1, right? And then maybe Magnus would have played c3. Like, you know, the thing about playing with white in 2024 in chess at the top level is you could force a draw in any line. Like, would Magnus have forced a draw against? I don't know. We'll never know. So that was step 1. And then Hans started yelling, you know, that Magnus is afraid of him. I'm paraphrasing. He didn't sit there and go, you know, Magnus is afraid of me. But he did say that, you know, he wanted Magnus to play for a win. He was yelling that he wants Magnus to beat him. Magnus denies us content. This is not really content. But then Hans had the second Title Tuesday to work with, and yeah, you might want to put on your seatbelts for this one, because he crushed everybody. 10 out of 11 points, including Hikaru. So one of his first opponents was Benjamin Bach. In this game, Hans had the black pieces. He played a Nimso Indian bishop to b4. None of this is important. c5, knight c6. This is a very solid line, and this bishop has gone there to perish. You've sort of walled the bishop out, so takes. And now Hans takes the center with e5. This is one of many ways to play when the knight is on f3. I think this type of setup is named after the German grandmaster Robert Hübner. I think his name is Robert. No, his last name is Hübner. d5, he gives a big center to his opponent. We see Bach trying to attack Hans like this. Hans gets it done in multiple ways in this video, but this game was quite impressive. So in this position, rather than sort of sitting around and waiting, he doesn't sit around and wait, and he begins firing off his kingside pawn at his opponent to try to mess around with his coordination. They trade, and now he plays f5. The idea of f5 is that, yes, you are pushing the pawns in front of your king, but you are trying to lock the position, not allow your opponent to kind of snipe at you from a distance with his bishops, which is exactly what Bach is doing. By the way, honestly, I love Bach's last name because it's the noise a chicken makes. I love it, Bach. And you know what? If you're Dutch, that's probably not even how it's pronounced. It's probably pronounced like Buck or something, but I love his last name. It's a great last name. Anyway, Benjamin Bach puts the rooks and bishops on these diagonals, and it's a pretty menacing position. So Hans goes here and says, you know what? I'm not going to sit around playing defense. b5. All right, I'm well equipped to strike back over here. You will also notice Black is not rushing with the move e4. Yes, this kind of seals the position, but this bishop just becomes a god. I mean, you essentially allow that bishop to just sit on b2 and have permanent pressure. So b5, taking on c4, potentially opening up the b file, as well as creating a weakness in the long term in the endgame. Queen f7, and now a well-timed strike in the center of the board. Yes, you open up this bishop. However, it's difficult for white to defend all the pawns in his position. And so Hans trades off the rooks, and basically his approach is, well, you're not going to mate me if we trade a bunch of pieces. All right? Bishop f5 is possible, but it's mate in 1. These guys are rated 2,900, 3,000. In Hans's case, 3,200. That's not going to happen. And now Hans plays queen f7, and now Bach goes on a massive attack of his own, and actually, over the next few moves, builds up a massive attack. And here he can actually deliver a knockout punch. And this is what I mean, like, Hans was getting it done in a variety of different ways. All right? He was getting it done in ways that were flashy and exciting and dynamic, and he was attacking people, but he was also getting it done in ugly ways. Like, sometimes you get a really bad position. Here, Bach has a knockout punch of bishop takes pawn. And the reason why this is a knockout punch is whatever takes in Black's position, you lose. If you take with the king, there's a discovered attack, so bishop f5, check, I pick up a piece, I'm up multiple pieces in the endgame, and if bishop g7, queen g7, the queen goes here, and it's actually very tough to protect yourself. So I would play queen f8, queen d7, and you're just winning, because you're going to feast on these pawns. And you might even win this endgame, although there's no reason to, there's no reason to trade the queens. So Bach misses it. Now Hans goes here, allowing actually that to happen again, because he has 5 seconds. And he keeps trying to defend himself, and Bach's like, what? I'm supposed to be winning. So Bach goes here, tries to trade the queens. Thinks he's still better. Hans puts the knight in the center. Now I'm not so sure anymore. I think white panicked a little bit in the time trouble, and now Hans is a pawn up in an endgame. Now Hans is a pawn up. So we go from under severe pressure to a pawn up, and the best part is he's not playing for a draw anymore. He just has to not lose his pawns. He wraps around into the white position. It's really difficult to defend the pawns. And the bishop is locked out. You locked out your own bishop. The king cannot get out of the way because you lose the pawn. So Bach ties his shoes together and tries to play soccer. Football. Soccer, football, satisfying the entire global audience. Hans pushed the pawn down. He wins. Game over. Bishop takes c4. Out of nowhere. This man Hans was worse for 50 moves. 50 moves is a little bit of an exaggeration. He was worse for like 40 moves. He was under pressure for 40 moves. He defended, and he wins the time scramble versus Bach, getting it done. And listen, you don't always win a flashy game, But he held on, and he wins, and there you go. Hans then played Speed of Light, who's actually a rival. Speed of Light is, I think, Andrew Hong, grandmaster from the U.S., and, so is Hans. These guys have played in the U.S. Junior Championship. I think they're roughly the same age. I've lost to both of them. I've lost to Andrew Hong in tournament chess. I lost to Hans in tournament chess when he was like 11. Then I got revenge when he was like a little bit older. But they're both very good. And this one also, I mean, this was a long battle. It started with an offbeat opening. Clearly, Hong looking for Hans to play d4. Hans says, you know what, let's just play in Italian because I'm 2,700 FIDE. I only know how to play e4, e5, as we can see from the Magnus game. Knight to f6, and now no fried liver. We just play just a clean Italian. Until this, when Andrew Hong plays d5. d5 is a very forcing line. It's not, not one of these maneuvering games. I cover many top-level games on this channel, d6, h6, etc. ed, knight d5, bishop g4, a4, a5, right? Very, very tense position. White trying to get this pawn, but he's under some pressure. Black has very active pieces, but potentially a destabilized center. h3, knight here, knight b6, and now we are targeting the bishop on c4, which Hans puts on the b3 square. Now, that's apparently theory. Because the bishop looks to me better on b5. And then you can play bishop takes and maybe take here. Yeah, Hans goes here, and that just hangs a pawn. Like, queen d3 is a free pawn, 100%. Which he takes. But clearly from these guys spending their time, this has all been played before. Because now you can move the knight. Your queen is hanging, but this queen is hanging. Now black plays queen f5. Apparently black is better, like on low depth. But both these guys are busting out these moves really quickly. Rook d8. All right, knight ef3. And now, instead of putting a rook on d8, the computer likes putting the rook on e8. Apparently. And then you trade, and then, and then bishop c2, and then queen d5, and then, I don't know, is it a draw? Like, do you repeat moves? I don't know. But Andrew Hong goes rook d8, queen e2, knight d5, and Hans tries to trade the queens. Get his knight in the center, target black's bishop, queen d7, rotates the queen over, trying to attack Andrew now because he's backing up. Look at this. All of a sudden, the queen went up and over. It went to e2, e4, h4. Here comes the knight. Here comes the bishop. White's position is all of a sudden coming. Look at this. Look at how scrunched up the white position was a few moves ago. Bang, bang, rotate, knight and bishop. Everybody gets out. Very quickly, everybody gets out. Everybody's coming to the party. Have a real good time. System of a Down. If you haven't listened to System of a Down, you have not lived. Queen f5. Queen g3. My favorite song is probably Radio Video by them. Low-key song, but that's my favorite song. Anyway, it's one of my favorite things to do is to like drop nuggets of things that I like in these videos, and then you guys are in the comments. Like, because I read the comments, unfortunately. I unfortunately read all the comments about never failing and getting oiled up and stuff. But I do enjoy when you guys are like, what? He knows that band, or he knows that thing? I thought he was just the idiot on the screen. We just talked about chess for 30 minutes every day. That part is also true. Anyway, queen f4. Andrew looking for an endgame, and we do get one, but here Hans finds a very nice idea. Bishop takes knight, removing the defender of the queen, and now you can take the queen, but you're going to lose the bishop. But since you're going to lose the bishop anyway, you play what's called a Zwischenzug, in-between move. Desperado, bishop takes f7. It's called a desperado. It's when you sacrifice a piece you know you're going to lose on your own terms, and then you proceed with the game as planned. So you give a check. This wouldn't work, by the way, if the queen was there, because it wouldn't be hanging, but also it could just take. And now he's up a pawn, and Andrew's got to defend himself, and Hans goes directly for the endgame because he studied enough Magnus games and probably court documents. So rook e1, b7 is hanging. Look at this. I mean, this is methodical. This is Magnesian. All right? Call him Hansnus Niemannson. Rook a1, knight d4, just pristine trading the pieces. Let's get that knight versus the bishop. Let's get the rooks. Now let's advance. What's actually funny is that the computer did not like that. Like, it wanted to keep pieces on the board. It wanted white to just expand like this. It seems like this is a natural continuation, but because white's extra pawn is a g pawn, which is doubled, white, according to the computer, doesn't have a big advantage. So, I mean, you still got to play chess, right? So Hans is expanding. The other reason white doesn't have a big advantage, this pawn is so weak. So Hans really would like to give it up. And he does, right? He suppresses the black position. But look at that. Look at Andrew Hong defending his king. The king is suffocated, but the bishop is on a4. Rook b6, a4, and now we just get into a scramble. Both guys, 10 seconds, 15 seconds on the clock. Anything goes. Andrew Hong, you know, oh my goodness, g5 is terrifying. Hans gives up a pawn to win it back. He gives us a pawn to win it back. He's threatening mate. He's threatening knight g5 and rook b8. Rook e5 defending, but knight f2 rerouting. Both guys at like 5 seconds now, and in another scramble. Uh-oh. It takes 50 moves of the game for Hans to finally break through. He plays that move with 2 seconds on the clock. Bishop b3 tries to disconnect, but check and knight f6. And it's the Arabian mate. Knight and rook in the corner of the board, and that's it. He gets the win. Oh my goodness. That was out of nowhere. The only defensive scheme here was to target the knight. I guess you could run your king out of the pin, but bishop f5, h6. The thing is, if you take the knight, there's no losing. I mean, you know, you can get to... Oh, whoa. You would take the pawn. I thought the pawn was protected. So you just take the knight and there's no more attack. But he wins the scramble, and, you know, this set up a crazy matchup, and this game was unbelievable. I was watching this game live while suffering through my own title Tuesday. And this game was nuts because it was 96 moves. Hikaru versus Hans, 96 moves. Keep in mind, Hans earlier he was like, I can't believe Magnus is not playing for a win against me, beat me, play against me. And then, oh my goodness, e4 in this game, my man, Caro Khan. This is the biggest matchup on chess.com yesterday, 32-93, 32-27. If we lived multiple lifetimes and combined our chess abilities, we wouldn't even be this high rated. Hikaru plays a 2 knights, a very solid positional approach. We will look at it from Hans's perspective. Bishop g4 is a very common move order. There are many. You give up the light squared bishop, and then you just basically regroup on the light squares. Now, what frequently happens in these positions is white plays a very solid setup, and the position gets very closed. But we just saw this. So, I mean, we just saw a position, what happens when both guys just play each other to a draw. Well, you know, we have knight d7, right? And queen e2 is played in order to just, like, use the f-pawn to attack. Black, the way I like to play this position, I like to put my knights like this. All right, g6, bishop g7, I play very solidly. Hans plays d4. That's a very committal decision. When you play against bishops, you generally want to replace the pawn structure you don't have a bishop on. You don't have a light squared bishop, so it would be good to keep it exactly like this. You don't want to open things up. The advantage immediately goes 0.45, right? 0.5 to white if you try to open up the position. So d4. Now, Hans already violating some principles. He puts a pawn on a dark square, and he potentially could open up the center. Now, if you play c5, f4, you know, b6, bishop g2, like, as you can see, white has a major advantage now, right? If you're playing on the wrong color complex, you're allowing the other side to open the board up, you're doing it wrong. Hans now plays h5. What? Yeah, I guess the idea is to play bishop g2 and even h4. I mean, just like make white have these holes, then play e5, and see, you're locking away the white pieces. So Hikaru plays h4 himself. Now Hans locks the position, but bishop h3. So Hikaru's gonna have a long-term advantage. Bishop d6, knight e7, c3, c5, and look, as we can tell, I mean, white's got some good pieces, but he's very restricted. But this is going to be a long game. Hikaru locks the position up, doesn't allow Hans to touch the center anymore, and in a close position, it's about who controls the pawn breaks. a6, b5, g6, f5. You're really never going to play f5. You play f5, you're a psycho. That's never going to happen. Queen e7, and Hikaru begins preparing a3. It's going to be a long game. a5. So this is what I find fascinating about this position, is that he traded his light squared bishop, yet he has 5 out of 8 pawns on dark squares, yet his bishop is garbage, and yet the position is equal because it's so closed, and he's fighting against Hikaru's pawn breaks. If Hikaru can't make a pawn break in this position, we're just going to make a draw. So b3, g6, f6. Look at Hans just creating this barrel, right? If this knight could kangaroo to d5, like, for example, king d8, if you couldn't take the knight, and this got to, look, white immediately is completely winning, right? Because the knight gets in, but you can't do that. There's no way for the knight to get here. f4, king c7. Hans walks his king out of the center of the board, escorts the king, and now rook f8. Big question, what's gonna happen over here, right? Rook a1, right? Both guys making preparations. Now Hikaru jumps into the position. The idea is very simple. If you take, this gets weak. I take e4 as a clearance, open diagonal, and I destroy you in the long run. Hans says, no thanks, g5. And now is a very big moment, because if Hikaru does this, it's over. The game's over. No one's ever going to win. The position's too close. So Hikaru's trying to win. He's trying to keep a flexible opportunity. So he takes, and he keeps trying to open the position. Hans shuts it down. But the way this works now, white has a pass pawn. His pawn's a passer. Someone's going to have to watch the pawn. This might be weak in the long run, right? So many things at play right now. Hikaru's now going to have to wrap around. He does. He begins building up on the B. It's a fascinating game. Building up on the B file. Rook A1. He gets the king to the corner. Hans plays rook G8, defending himself, enabling the movement of his queen and the knight to F6. Hikaru plants the knight on H3 for long-term pressure. Knight H7, queen D1. And Hikaru's plan here is stall Hans out, overload Hans's nervous system, break through the position, and get a win. B6, rook A2, queen F6. Guys are shuffling. It's exactly the Hans game in the Magnus game, but that one was a dead draw. Now look at Hans. Hans doesn't have to do anything, but Hans plays A4. This dude does not have to move. He can wait and wait and wait, and finally he's like, you know what? I'm gonna call the shots. Tough moment for Hikaru, who takes on A4. He spends 17 seconds, he takes on A4, and now Hans controls the final remaining pawn break in the position. If there's a chance that Hans breaks through in the future with B5, we might have something happen, all right? Bishop D1, rook A7, this is nuts, 40 moves, A4, now there's no pawn breaks. Now you can't play B5, it's just never gonna work. But pawn moves, you jump in. Rook A3, all right? Both guys at around a minute, knight F6, wait a minute, G5's hanging. G5 is hanging, but if you take G5, then you have to calculate knight G4, but then there might be knight E6, but then you can sack the queen maybe. Oh my God, I don't even know. Like, you don't even have to do that. You might just be able to immediately rotate. So maybe Hikaru's like, do I really want this pawn? He spends a long time, he doesn't take it. He spends 25 seconds, he doesn't take the pawn. That might have been a moment there. I mean, the computer liked it, but it was very dangerous. Rook A5, knight F2, it's a huge game of shuffling. Now Hikaru's king is blocking. Look at Hans. Hans in this position says, I'm gonna walk my king to the other side of the board. It's a deceptively dead position. It's anything but dead. There is enough room for both guys to maneuver their pieces to certain situations like knight H3, knight G1, knight F3. Both guys can sacrifice at some moment. They're both gonna get down very low on time, and then one of them is gonna strike. They both got 20 seconds. They're shuffling. Pressure is building. White could put his queen there and pressure G5. Bishop C1, queen D8. Oh my goodness, this is so stressful. Bishop D2, queen D6, shuffling, 65 moves. 20 seconds versus 9 for Hans. Bishop E7, Bishop F6. Hikaru repositioning. Oh my goodness, he's taking over maybe. 70 moves. Knight F8, knight H7, knight B4, Bishop E1. Something's got to give. Somebody is going to have to do something at some point. Knight E1, queen C6, knight C2. Hans waited for white to kind of tie his shoes together a little bit. Oops. And with 4 seconds on the clock, he takes on D3. Take. He is now losing. However, he's got a piece for 2 pawns. And if he gets out of the way, E4 is coming. Anything can happen. Now, the winning move here is knight A3, bringing the queen to defend the rook, and then you go rook B3, and then you can stabilize. But Hikaru plays this. And now Hans is winning if he puts the queen on H1. And the idea is this is mate. That's mate. And it's really hard to stop because if you play rook F3, I play E4. Somehow you can't defend yourself and you can't move the bishop because I was pinning you. Queen H1 is winning. But Hans goes back because he's trying to play E4. He's trying, queen H1's a really tough move to spot, right? He could have played knight A3 and the defense, knight A3, queen H1 is that now you can move the bishop. So you move the bishop, you get a queen trade, and white is completely winning because there's no queen anymore. So Hans misses queen H1, so does Hikaru, but now here comes Hans' pieces. And this is a really tough position because Hans got his pawns rolling. Hikaru doesn't play bishop G2, he sacks the knight back. So he sacks the knight back, gets the second pawn back, and now he's gonna win his rook. Hans takes on c4. Hikaru takes on a8. Rook takes a8. This is unbelievable. So Hikaru's up a point of material. He's got 20 seconds. Hans has 5 seconds on the clock. Okay? Queen d3. Obviously, if you trade queens, I've already been over this. You're gonna lose the endgame. It's gonna be a long, boring endgame. So queen d5. But queen f3. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Now what? You have to trade the queens. Oh, Hikaru is cleaning up. But Hans activates his knight. Bishop to g1 from Hikaru. Rook to d8, ready to push the pawn. And now, Hikaru needed to actually go back because the pawn is about to get rolling. But he plays a5. And Hans plays d3. Just runs the pawn away. The better move apparently would have been to take first. And what happens there is if you take rook a5, d3, you lose the knight. I go d2. And then, you can do this and it's going to be a draw. But instead of that, Hans blunders in parentheses, and now rook f1 actually saves the day. Rook f1 saves the day because you actually can't take. Now you lose the race. Now I get to play rook d1. So you lost the race. That was the key difference, is that the other way, the rook never got to the f1 square fast enough. So now rook f1 is winning. Now Hikaru here mentally prepares bishop takes c5, and then he can win this pawn. He also mentally prepares bishop c5, d2, and rook d3. But there's a difference which rook you put on d3. If Hikaru plays rook fd3, like this, Hans can queen, and it's defended, but also there is bc5, and the pawn promotes. c4, rook d8, bishop d8, a7, d1 queen, a8 queen. And it's a draw. It's going to end with perpetual check, probably. But Hikaru plays this rook to d3. And that is losing. Because after this, like I just showed you, there's a difference, right? a6, c4, rook d8, bishop d8. And if white plays a7, d1 queen, I mate you. Instant replay. If you move your f rook to d3, then what happens is, after this long sequence, you have an a rook, not an f rook. So I cover the diagonal. But what happens in this game, not this rook moving and opening the diagonal, what happens in this game is Hikaru moves the a rook. So when this sequence of moves goes down, BC, rook d8, BC, a6, and this sequence, you block your own queen. And so Hans wins. Hikaru plays rook d3 in the game, d2, rook d3, and the game is over because of the promotion. Crazy. BC, rook d8, bishop d8, a6, d1 queen, and it even goes down like this, and that's just over. Even the pawn made it, right? Because instead of taking, Hikaru should have just pushed. So Hans beats Hikaru. That's crazy. He beats Hikaru. He gets to his lifetime peak elo of 3,230. And then he tweets. I guess I'll show it to you. If you got the patience, don't go anywhere. I got you right now. He tweets out, "Hey Hikaru, how about a blitz match? Good game today." I'll show it to you right now. Crazy. I can't believe this is the timeline we live in. Good game today, Hikaru. Why don't we play a blitz match for charity? Loser donates $10,000 to the winner's charity of choice. Kindly waiting for your reply. And Hans won his first ever title Tuesday with 10 out of 11 points. Wow. We got to get a cage match. Is what we got to do. We got to. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Hans Niemann is 32-30 on chess.com Blitz. He's the third highest rated Blitz player on chess.com right now. He's yelling at Magnus to play him for a win, and then Magnus doesn't want to lose, and he's beating Hikaru and challenging him to $10,000 blitz matches. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. Just when I thought that content was drying out, I mean, good Lord, we are back and better than ever. I'll see you for the next one. Get out of here for now.